Welcome back to another episode of the Mainly Hoops podcast. We've had a pretty slow week here with the only real games being the Diamond Head Classic last night with Nebraska taking down Oregon State in the championship. But other than that, no games today, no games tomorrow. Games starting back up on Saturday. And even still, it's a little bit of a slow weekend in terms of heavy competition. Still a few bye games out there before conference play really kicks in next week. Particularly in the ACC's kicked off a little bit, but it's really going to ramp up. SEC and Big 12 are going to start up here after the new year. So those are the two conferences that haven't played any conference games yet. So a lot to be on the lookout for there. But for the weekend here, just a few games we're going to touch on here in regards to previewing. The first game being Ole Miss at Memphis. Memphis, they've played a tough schedule and they've won some games that they probably shouldn't have. They tend to play down to the level of their competition. As for Ole Miss, they haven't really played anyone yet, right? I mean, they've played Purdue, and that was really their only tough competition, and they lost that game at the buzzer. And Purdue is turning out to maybe not be all that good. So, as we kind of predicted with the Big Ten. So, I think this is a good test for both teams. I'm not really sure how good either team is yet. Ole Miss hasn't beaten anyone, so it's a real question mark there, right? They're ranked 16th in the country, but it's a real question mark as to what they really are.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see what Ole Miss looks like, really. I mean, they have a couple nice wins. Like they beat BYU the night before they played Purdue, beat Louisville on the road, which they're solid wins. I don't think they're aging all that well, but still decent wins. It shows that they can actually compete with high major competition at least. But I'll be interested to see like if their defense is really, taking the leap from last year. The defense they really struggled last year, and it hasn't looked like a typical crispier defense just yet. So definitely interested to see that. And Ole Miss might match up fairly well here. They play in the gaps. They try to keep you away from the rim. And like Memphis with Haggerty, like he loves to get to the rim. He loves to get a foot into the paint and like create for shooters. And if he can't get a foot in the paint, it's going to be a little bit harder for him because he's not the most talented perimeter shooter out there. Guys like Tyrese Hunter and Colby Rogers, maybe if they, keep their shooting stretches going, they can shoot over the top of this defense and, kind of blow them out of the water at home. So, yeah. And then with Memphis, it's just, yeah, they always play down to their competition. They'll play up in these big games, and they're coming off of a pretty embarrassing loss at home, albeit it was against a good Mississippi State team. I think they come ready in this game, and I do think the Ole Miss defense hasn't like completely figured things out. They've gotten carved up a little bit by some poor competition in bye games, and they've allowed some bye game competition to keep it close. So I think Memphis comes out extremely motivated off of this little break with that loss, and they can get the home win here.
Yeah, I'll be interested. Do you know what the projected spread here is in that game?
It actually already came out. It's Memphis -1.5.
Okay, so yeah, that's not surprising. I expect a tight game here. This is, like I said, it's a true test for Ole Miss on the road. Can they get a quality win, right? Like Memphis, we're not super high on, but can they get a quality win on the road against the Memphis team? Like, it's never easy winning on the road. Memphis is a solid team. They have some good wins. I think the rim merchant might have a solid day. He's continued to shoot it well. So, maybe Maui wasn't all that much of a fluke. Maybe he's just figured it out.
At 48%. So
yeah, maybe he's just figured it out. I mean, if he shoots it at 48%, he's going to be in the NBA conversation. Like,
yeah, I personally don't see. His inside the arc field goal percentage is like 10% lower than his 3-point percentage. So I would expect his 3-point percentage to like take a pretty significant dip here pretty soon, and he goes back to his early Texas days, Tyrese Hunter, and even Iowa State, where he wasn't an efficient shooter at all. But this is a pretty good matchup for him. He's going to have opportunities from beyond the arc, a team in Ole Miss that gives up a ton of threes. So it'll be up to Hunter and Rogers to hit shots, because I don't think the post-up game is going to have all that much success here with Ole Miss. They like to double the post. They like to really help in the lane to just keep you away from the rim in general. So it's going to be up to those perimeter shooters to keep the stretch going that they're on.
Yeah, no, I like you said, it's going to be a tight game, I think, but I think I'm going to side probably with the home team. I don't have a huge opinion on this game, but I think just Memphis being at home, coming off that loss against Mississippi State over the weekend, that's probably the side to be on. But I could easily see this game going either way.
Yeah, who knows with this Memphis team? I mean, they're going to be ready to go at least in this game. Like you don't really know what they're going to look like when they have to play down to competition. Like we saw it against Arkansas State, they got blown out of the water and they didn't have any energy. If they should come out with energy in this game coming off the huge loss. So a motivated Memphis team with all the talent that they have is a pretty scary team. Honestly, we saw it in Maui. We saw it before Maui as well.
Yeah, for sure. We have a ranked matchup also on Saturday between Gonzaga and UCLA. This game's played at the Intuit Dome, neutral site game. UCLA coming off that loss against UNC over the weekend in heartbreaking fashion. Gonzaga looking to pick up a nice quality win here against another ranked team. This should be a really quality game, and for the viewers' sake, I'm really hoping like Tyler Bilodeau, Graham Ike, they both stay out of foul trouble because I think that could be an interesting matchup. I think that there's a lot to be excited about in this game.
Yeah, I mean, Bilodeau getting into foul trouble was like the number one reason they ended up losing that game against UNC. Like they looked like they were about to run away with that thing until he picked up his fourth foul with about 10 minutes to go. But yeah, it should be an exciting game. And Gonzaga, they probably feel like they need this game. They don't really have a ton of great wins on their resume right now. They've lost all of their biggest games. They lost to UConn, lost to Kentucky recently. And yeah, they definitely feel like they need to come out with a ton of energy to come out on top in this game. I think they do because I'm not super sold on this UCLA offense still. They've kind of flopped in their biggest games. They beat Arizona but had to come back from down 13, and we know what Arizona looks like right now. It just doesn't really look like a great basketball team. So they don't really have like a huge marquee win. And I think they're just a bit overrated at this point in time. Obviously the defense is great, but I need to see somebody else besides Bilodeau like create like productive offense. Like obviously we saw it in that spurt when we were at the Garden watching. Like it looked pretty ugly when he was off the floor. So I do expect Gonzaga to win this game. I think they have enough offense here, and UCLA is probably not going to be able to put enough rim pressure on the weaker Gonzaga front line on the defensive side.
Yeah, I think that, like you said in that game at the Garden, UCLA they just don't have enough consistency in the other guys outside of Bilodeau, right? He picked up his fourth foul. Like Sebastian Mack was great in the first half, but in the second half he only had like 4 points, right? In the first half he was not only getting stuff for himself, but he was carving up UNC in the pick and roll. But if other guys aren't able to do stuff like that when Bilodeau's off the court, they're really in trouble. It looks like this projected spread is Gonzaga -4. It feels like Gonzaga, like the UCLA, they're going to be motivated for this game, right? They haven't played in 6 or 7 days, right? They played at the Garden. They're back kind of at home at the Intuit Dome in California. But Gonzaga travels well too. They're out there on the West Coast. They're going to be ready to go. They haven't played in a week, but the last game they played, I believe, was against like Bucknell or Nichols or something. So, they haven't really played like a tough game in a while since that Kentucky game, really. So, this is a good tune-up for them before they dive into conference play. And overall, I just think this Gonzaga team is just the better team. Like UCLA, it is a solid team, but I think that, they don't necessarily belong in the top 25. To me, they're more in that like 26 to 40 range. Kind of probably hovering on that bubble by season's end, depending on how they do in conference. They're a good team, but they have some flaws. They're off, especially on the offensive end. The defense is solid, but they're playing against one of the top offenses in the country here. I expect Gonzaga to be able to kind of get what they want, especially with Nemhard and the week off. And they haven't really played a tough game for a couple of weeks now. So I expect Gonzaga to come out ready to go and take care of business against the Bruins.
For sure. Yeah. And Gonzaga's probably going to have the more friendly home crowd here. I think they travel way better than UCLA does. Like, you see UCLA's home games, it's not even really all that good of an environment. So I wouldn't be surprised if it was more of like a 70-30 split for Gonzaga, just because, they're a powerhouse, and like especially out on the West Coast, like they're one of the, the best programs out there. So I wouldn't be surprised if you had a super friendly crowd. And, at the end of the day, I think late in the game, I usually like to go back to better offense, especially with Gonzaga being able to, score in the post against this UCLA team that doesn't have like a daunting front line by any means. They're going to play one-on-one in the post for the most part, or else they're kind of going to get shredded by these shooters and like Caleb Battle and Hickman and Nemhard getting some shots as well. But I do think UCLA can kind of cut off the middle pick and roll game. I think they cover that stuff pretty well. But it's just, there are just so many actions and so many different players they have to cover on Gonzaga, and I think they'll have enough success on offense to run away with it.
Yeah, and I think also like in UCLA's lack of offense may lead to some more transition opportunities for Gonzaga, which could be a problem, right? Gonzaga, one of the best offensive teams in the country. If they can get out and run with those guards, Battle and Nemhard, and just some of their guys just getting out and in transition, and they lose shooters in transition. Like, I think that's going to be an opportunity for Gonzaga to knock down some easy catch and shoot opportunities, where I think UCLA is much better defensively in the half court. You saw against UNC some of the areas where they did struggle defensively was the times where they turned it over, and Ian Jackson was able to get out and run in transition, and they were able to get some easy buckets. So if they're not able to score here, where Gonzaga's defense isn't elite by any stretch, we've touched on that, but if they're not able to score with ease, that could pose some problems with Gonzaga being able to get out and run.
Yeah, and regardless if their transition defense is any good, like if you're going on scoring droughts and still get back on defense, like Gonzaga's going to find a way to score on you in the half court. So you go on a 3 or 4 minute scoring drought, it's probably going to be an 8 to 10-0 run for Gonzaga, just because they're so good on that end, and they're not going to go on droughts against even the best defenses in the country.
Right. Yeah, for sure. And then the third game on Saturday, we got Utah State coming off a really quality win on the road against St. Mary's, playing against San Diego State. This game being played at San Diego State. San Diego State still in the top 25. I believe they're up to 20th now. Projected spread on this game is like 3, I believe. Utah State, they're coming off that quality road win, but this is going to be a tough act to follow on the road at San Diego State. Never an easy place to play, especially against Brian Dutcher, and especially coming off a massive road victory against St. Mary's 6 days ago by the time they play this game.
Absolutely. And, I'm just fired up that Mountain West play is back in full force. We have 3 pretty good games. We got New Mexico matching up at Colorado State as well. So that should be a fun one. But I've started to warm up to the San Diego State team a little bit more. Like, Brian Dutcher just keeps churning out good teams one after another. I was pretty worried about the offense coming into the season, but they've had some guys step up. Like, Nick Boyd's been much better than I expected. BJ Davis has been a pretty incredible shot maker for them so far. This team doesn't even have Reese Waters back yet. So I expect this team, they're on the upward trajectory, even though they're in the top 20 in the country in the AP poll. Obviously, I don't think they're an actual top 20 team in the country just yet. But, the defense is always there. They have unbelievable rim protection that starts with Magoon Guath and then Jared Coleman-Jones playing by his side. And that's key against Utah State, who they heavily rely on their rim offense. Ian Martinez and Mason Falslev getting to the rim, scoring in transition is like huge for Utah State. San Diego State cuts that off, and I think they have the highest block rate in the entire country, and Magoon Guath blocks like 20% of shots that come his way, which is a ridiculous number. And I think that's going to be a major factor in this game. Then add in the fact that they're, they get to play at home here in probably the best home all year, maybe outside of the Gonzaga game. But Utah State hasn't really played in a hostile environment just yet. St. Mary's is a great team. The environment there isn't all that great. It's a pretty small gym overall. So, and I'm just not super high on the Utah State defense either. Like if they're going to play a lot of zone in this game, I think San Diego State has enough guys on the perimeter that can operate against this zone and hit shots. So, yeah, I take the Aztecs here. I wouldn't be surprised if they won big.
Yeah, I think this is a good spot for San Diego State. I think they have, obviously, as we've harped on enough over the course of our 22 episodes before this one, Brian Dutcher's an elite coach. They're always going to be good on the defensive end. Offensively, they have their droughts at times. I don't know, for anyone that watched their game against Cal last weekend, I know, Cody, you were watching it. It was pretty ugly. Early it was 10-2 Cal, then all of a sudden at halftime Cal was down. Like I don't know what it was, but neither team was really scoring that well. Offensively, it was a very challenged game. So San Diego State is no stranger to going on scoring droughts, as we saw in their game against Gonzaga. So I think that this game is really going to come down to that, like, whose defense can be better, but also like whose offense can overcome the great defensive play and some of these scoring droughts, to come out on top. And I'm going to always side with the home team, I think, in this case, and the better coach. I think that San Diego State just has a better way about them right now. They're in the top 20. Not necessarily do they belong there, not necessarily, but I think this is just really a good spot for them, especially after Utah State's coming off that big win against St. Mary's. So I'm going to side with San Diego State just because of the coaching, and I think that the home environment, and I think they're just a better team at the current moment. But by season's end, I wouldn't be at all surprised to see Utah State as kind of the better team.
Yeah, I mean, Utah State just keeps churning out unbelievable seasons with their third different coach in 5 years, and every single guy that's come in has been unbelievable. Like with Jared Calhoun this year, they have a really, really good offense this year. The defense has improved. Like Jared Calhoun's never really had a good defense in his coaching days, especially at Youngstown State. He runs a similar style now, but the defense looks like it's really improved. They're turning teams over much more often. And yeah, it is just kind of crazy how good this Utah State team is every year, with Danny Sprinkle leaving after winning the regular season title when he went to Washington. And then the coach Odom as well, who's over at VCU now. Like he had 3 unbelievable years, made the tournament twice. So it is good for college hoops when Utah State's good. That's one of the best environments in the country that nobody really knows about. And it's so hard to win there with the elevation. But, going on the road, it makes it a little bit harder for them since they don't have that elevation advantage.
Yeah, no doubt. But, like I said, not a great weekend of games, but solid enough. With that, we wanted to, before conference play really starts in full force, we wanted to touch on some of these teams. We're each going to go through an overachiever and an underachiever in each conference of the Power Five, including the Big East in that. I think it's important just kind of heading into conference play to discuss which teams really performed well out of conference and which teams really didn't do as well as maybe we had expected.
Yeah. And we should get into it in the Big 12. My underachiever, I had Arizona. I mean, I think it's probably the most obvious one, but they've been, pretty bad. They haven't won any big games yet. And, I do think they're going to turn it around at some point. I think it's a little bit overblown. Like people are calling this team like a bad team, like surefire, not going to make the tournament, but they haven't won any big games, and they've really struggled on the offensive end. The guards have really struggled, but I do expect them to turn it around at some point. Like this team is getting a lot of slander, but they still rate pretty highly in like advanced metrics and predictive metrics. Like Torvik has them sitting at the 14th best team in the country, which like I think is a little bit crazy. I would have them closer to like 25, 30 range, but I do expect them to turn it around. And they've lost a lot of tight games. So, but they do need to improve, especially at the guard spot. Love's starting to hit more shots now, but he's just hasn't been great overall this year. I mean, he's probably the worst year of his college career.
Yeah, no, I agree for sure. And, obviously Arizona is the easy pick. I'm going to throw another one out there in the Big 12 just to be different for an underachiever. I'm going to throw Baylor out there. They're 7-3, I believe, right now. They've been fine, but all the big games they've played, they haven't won, right? They haven't beaten anyone really with any notoriety. So, and that's not really like a Scott Drew team. Now, of course, early in the season we talked about they have a lot of new players, so the continuity aspect of their team is not there. Defensively, they're not great. Still trying to figure some things out there. They've dealt with some injuries, but the record doesn't necessarily show it. Because 7-3 is fine, but in terms of like the eye test and how they've looked against some of the top teams, I'm going to go with them as an underachiever, considering kind of what they were expected to be coming in.
Yeah, I would agree with that. The defense has especially been pretty bad. I mean, I think people kind of expected them to turn it around with the guard play on the defensive side, with Edgecombe and Nunn like carrying the defense and forcing turnovers at an elite rate, and they kind of have, but they've also really struggled to defend inside the arc and from beyond the arc. They're giving up so many open threes right now, so it's something they have to clean up. And obviously we've talked about that the zone isn't going to mask all of their issues, and it's going to take away from their turnover forcing ability. So yeah, they have a lot to work out, although they still have an elite offense. But yeah, they definitely need to pick up some big wins in order to be a top 3 seed like they typically are.
Yeah, and like you've said, right, about some of these other teams, if you have to go to a zone to mask your issues, like how good are you? Right? If you can't man up against some of these teams with the athletes that you have, like you're really not that serious of a contender, right? Unless you have just an elite zone, which they don't, right? The zone is just used to mask issues. Whether that's keeping the ball in front or rebounding, it's all just kind of a jumble over there in Baylor right now. I think Scott Drew's trying to do the best he can with what he's got, but he knows that defense is not very good, and they're going to struggle all year, and they're not going to be able to beat some of these top teams. So, based on where they were maybe expected to be in the history of Baylor, I'm going to go with them as the underachiever in this conference.
Yeah, for sure, especially to where they've been. Like, they won a national championship within the last 5 years. So, and, they haven't had a ton of tournament success outside of that. So, yeah, I mean, they need to pick up some big wins. They're going to have plenty of opportunities in the Big 12, which is still a great conference. Obviously, the SEC's kind of overthrown them as the best one this year. But, yeah, they're going to have plenty of opportunities. They're going to win big games, and they're going to lose some games that they should win just because the defense isn't great and it's not going to travel with them on the road. So, yeah, definitely need to figure some things out.
Yeah, I agree. Now, as for an overachiever, I know you had West Virginia on your radar.
Yeah, I'm always been high on Darian DeVries as a coach, and he brought in some nice recruits, but I just didn't expect it to all come together right away like it did. They have obviously some great wins. They beat Gonzaga when they were ranked 3rd in the country. They beat Arizona, who I had as the underachiever, but they were still ranked at the time and were a solid team. Yeah, they picked up some really nice wins. I really didn't expect them to come out of the gates as hot as they did, and I didn't expect Javon Small to be this good. Like, he's hitting shots at an elite rate right now. Him and Tucker DeVries. And Tucker DeVries is down right now, which is kind of a concern because they don't have a lot of depth. But they have a lot more balance than I anticipated. I didn't think they were going to be as good of a shot making team as they are. And the defense is held strong, even though they're not like super big on the front line. The depth, like, they also lost to Monty Hansberry possibly for a week or two. We're gonna have to see more on that. And he's big for the offense. He's big for the defense as well. He's a nice shot maker at the 5. But yeah, overall they've had a nice start with some nice wins. They had a really good battle for Atlanta's trip.
Yeah, no, I mean their battle for Atlanta's trip was huge, especially that win over Gonzaga. They're sitting at 9-2 right now. you really can't be upset considering where we expected this team to be. Now, I think that maybe once conference play hits here after the new year, I think we're going to maybe see a reality check in West Virginia. But up to this point, it's kind of hard to disagree with you that like they have been the best team, or not the best team, but the biggest overachiever in this conference.
Yeah, and there's really not that many overachievers, to be honest with you. Everybody's basically been pretty close to where I've had them at, besides this West Virginia team. It may be Arizona State, like relative to where everyone thought they were going to be entering game one of the season. But besides that, everyone's kind of held firm, like at the top. We expected Houston, Iowa State, and Kansas to be the top three. That's kind of how it is right now. The middle of the pack has kind of stayed strong. Nobody has like any like horrific losses so far. So yeah, I mean, that's just the one that stood out to me.
Yeah, I'm with you for sure. I mean, like you said, there's really not much for overachievers in this conference right now. I mean, it's pretty bleak. I was almost on the fence. I was on the fence about putting Kansas as my underachiever. I know they're sitting also at 9-2, but they've struggled mightily. They lost to Missouri, lost at Creighton. Both teams who are like middle of the pack teams in their conference right now, based on injuries and whatnot, and almost blew a lead to UNC at home, who's turned out to be not very good. So, that was almost my underachiever. But I think Arizona has been too bad. I think Baylor, they just don't have any quality wins yet. So, but Kansas is definitely right there, I think.
I agree. Yeah, they've definitely underachieved. Like they came in as the number one team in the country. We had them as our national champion. So I guess that could have been the easy prediction for underachiever. But like a team like TCU has really underachieved as well. Like relative to, they didn't have super high expectations, but injuries have kind of brought them down, and they really look rough on the offensive end.
Yeah, no, I agree. Now in the SEC, I'm going to jump right in with my overachiever. My favorite team, right, or one of my favorite teams in the country, Vanderbilt, at least from like an up and coming standpoint. I love Mark Byington. Was on him early in the season. They're sitting at 11-1 right now. They've had some quality wins. They haven't played a ton of great teams. Their only loss is to undefeated Drake by 11. But they beat Nevada. They handled Seton Hall by 16. They beat Virginia Tech, who's obviously down this year. Beat TCU by 9. But they're sitting at 11-1. They've been much better than anyone ever would have expected. Like, I don't know, did they even win 11 games all of last season? Right? Like they're gonna hang with some tough competition, especially at home in the SEC. So I think Mark Byington really has this team headed in the right direction. He did a great job in the portal, has them in a position to, not do anything serious yet, but at least be able to compete with some teams at home.
Yeah, they've certainly been an overachiever. And honestly, like, who hasn't been an overachiever in the SEC? There's only one team in the whole conference with 3 losses. It's South Carolina. They're 9-3. Like, I think I would say every single team has been an overachiever. But yeah, Mark Byington's doing a great job right away. They're a tough team to prepare for too. Like, they're super aggressive, turnover forcing style. They have a lot of good defenders that match their style as well. Like, he did a great job in the portal. But mine, I'm going to go with Oklahoma. Like, they're sitting at 12-0, undefeated, with some nice wins. I think they've been pretty damn fortunate, honestly. Like, they've won all of their wins against quality competition or by like less than 4 points or 5 points. They're in their most recent one and won 3 from Jeremiah Fears to take down Michigan in a game that they were down by double digits. And but obviously, like, you got to give them credit. They've won all of these games. They've beaten all of their bye game competition, although it hasn't really been all that impressive. Their bye game wins. They've allowed some teams to hang in there, but doing a good job, as he always does in non-conference. He's a tough coach to prepare for on short rest. So, and in like these MTE situations, he does a really nice job just on no days rest. Like, nobody can really prepare for his defensive style. He likes to change what he does. His defense can kind of morph into, be able to play against any offense in the entire country. They have the personnel to do that. But I mean, the SEC is tough, and I wouldn't be surprised if they went 6-12 in the Big 12 and still got in the tournament. Like, they have a good enough resume right now. They pick up 6 quality wins in the SEC, which every single win's a quality win at this point. I think they could still be in the tournament.
Yeah, I'm with you. This conference is just a gauntlet. I mean, like you said, only one team with 3 losses. The teams with 2 losses, I mean, Bama's got a couple losses. Kentucky's got a couple losses. Missouri, who beat the number 1 team in the country at the time. You got Texas down there. Arkansas, who's as talented as anyone in this conference. They just have some flaws and haven't quite figured it out. But on the offensive end, like, they're talented. But Texas A&M has a couple losses. This conference is just loaded right now. It's gonna be a tough conference season, and I think for consumers, it's gonna be really fun to watch, without a doubt. So that leads us into underachiever in this conference, and I know you're on Arkansas. I'm also on Arkansas. To me, it just feels like Cal hasn't used these guys right. It feels like he's maybe starting to figure some things out in terms of like rotation, and guys are starting to get a little bit healthier, like Adu. Brazil's starting to play a few more minutes, which I think is the move, especially from like an offensive defensive versatility standpoint. But they just haven't been good enough, right? They haven't beaten quality teams. Their only real quality win, I guess, would be that Michigan win where they had to come back, right? I guess they lost to Baylor by a few points. But overall, like, this Arkansas team, based on what it was, and we did talk about early in the year how this could be maybe a challenge early on with all the new bodies coming in, much like for any team. Like, if you're bringing in a slew of new guys that have never played together, granted, some of them did play together at Kentucky, but if you're bringing in a huge group of guys, it's going to take some time to learn to play together. But I feel like Cal maybe hasn't done the best job in terms of getting them to that point fast enough, right? You've had like 12 conference games or not conference games, but 12 games up to this point. And John L. Davis really still is like hit or miss, right? That's a guy that you probably paid big money in the portal to go get. And we're out here like some games barely even utilizing him. And when you do utilize him, it's not even in the right way. Like, it's super confusing to me. Why even go get him when you could have just like groomed some of these younger guys and had them ready by the end of the year, right? Like, the way that team has been run is very confusing to me.
Yeah, I mean, we kind of saw it the last couple of years at Kentucky as well. But besides last year, like, everything was masked by that team just being so talented and shooting the ball so well. He doesn't really have the elite shooting outside of Davis, and it's kind of showed the flaws in a Coach Cal offense it's pretty ISO heavy. So, giving the ball to Adu Thiero at the elbow and telling him to just get downhill and either draw a foul or score at the rim, and it just hasn't really been all that efficient. Although he's been solid, but it's just not super efficient offense overall. You have a lot of like mid-range dominant shooters, and Coach Cal's okay with guys taking open mid-range jumpers, and it's just not that efficient of a shot if you're going to take it at that high of a volume. But overall, like, it's kind of unfair to call Arkansas like an underachiever. Like, we expected this a little bit, and I kind of just threw Arkansas in there as the underachiever just because I felt like I had to throw a team in there. Like we talked about it. This conference has been so awesome all year.
Yeah, no, it certainly has. As for a conference that hasn't been that good, it's the Big East, right? It started to be a little bit better. But starting with underachievers, now injuries have kind of riddled them a little bit, but I'm going to go with Creighton as kind of an underachiever. They struggled. They have 5 losses already. They're sitting at 8-5. They have some quality wins. They beat Kansas. But in terms of maybe where they were supposed to be, the depth was always a question. But they've beaten Villanova. They hung in with Bama. but they got hammered by San Diego State. For anyone that saw that game in Vegas, lost to Nebraska, lost to A&M in Vegas as well. You know, they're just a not very deep team that relies so much on, like, so much is asked of Ryan Kalkbrenner every night. And if he's not able to produce, especially now with Pop Isaacs out for the season, like, it's falling all on Ashworth and Jemiah Neal. And Miller hasn't been very good. So, you know, it's really this Creighton team we had our questions about coming into the season, right? This was a team that we were a little bit shaky on because of the lack of depth. You know, could Pop Isaacs and Stephen Ashworth really hold down what Baylor Shireman and Trey Alexander were able to do, and now they're gone, and like there's a big void to fill there, and that maybe was a bit underestimated. But now that those guys are gone and we've seen how they performed, you know, maybe it is a little bit unfair to say that they're an underachiever, because, you know, circumstances really changed there in Omaha. But, you know, this team, for where they started the season and kind of the expectations of where they've been trending over the last few years, this team to me is a little bit of an underachiever.
Yeah, and they were kind of underachieving before Pop Isaacs went out for the year. You know, they had those
Yeah.
losses against in the Las Vegas MTE before he went down for the year. So it's kind of it is. I think it's pretty fair to say that they've been an underachiever. It feels like a little bit of a throwaway year, which kind of sucks because it's Ryan Kalkbrenner's last season. He's probably the most valuable player in the Big East. He's been that good for his entire career there. And yeah, there just isn't enough creation. I mean, I think they were hoping Jemiah Neal was going to be this kind of on-ball star, but like obviously he's had a couple good games recently, but I don't really think he's that guy by any means. And they're relying on Ashworth a little bit too much as well in the pick and roll. And he's mostly just a 3-point shooter. Like he doesn't really create any offense inside the arc. So this isn't your typical Creighton team, although they still have like the spot up shooting. They just don't have guys to create those spot up looks, and it's gonna make for a pretty long year. And they also haven't really taken care of the ball that well. They're turning it over at, I think they're outside of the top like 150 in turnover rate right now in the country. So that's not typical of a Greg McDermott team. Obviously, they still have balance like with the defense with Kalkbrenner back there, but it's definitely not a team that has the upside to like get to an Elite Eight. Like I wouldn't be surprised if they're probably not going to make the tournament. Realistically, I don't think there's enough good wins to get unless they beat UConn and St. John's or Marquette. They have to beat one of those three teams twice and probably split against those teams. So, yeah, I anticipate kind of a long year the rest of the year.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I almost went with Xavier. You know, they've been a real disappointment too. But I know you went another route with Providence.
Yeah, I went Providence. I didn't have high expectations for them, but they've been far worse than, you know, even I did here. They started off the year with some tight wins over some not so good competition. They opened the year with a 4-point win over Central Connecticut State, a 9-point win over Hampton. These teams are just not great basketball teams. And you know, they don't really have any key wins at this point outside of the BYU win at home. And I don't really know like how much of a needle mover that win is. You know, they lost to little brother Rhode Island in a road game. They just don't really have any really inspiring efforts outside of the first half that we saw against St. John's, where they looked really good on the offensive side and they got super stagnant in the second half. I just don't think Kim English's offense is all that creative enough. I think it's a lot of there is some ISO, you know, elements to the offense, but I don't think they have enough creation to execute an offense that's like that. And until they get Bryce Hopkins back, they're probably going to be on a similar trajectory. They have Marquette coming up at home, so maybe they step up with a all hands on deck effort and take them down like they did against BYU. And it kind of felt like a, you know, this is our season kind of game. And, you know, it probably feels like that again. But overall, it just hasn't been a good season at all, along with a lot of Big East teams so far this year at the bottom. Like you could pick pretty much any team at the bottom half. Sounds like Georgetown.
Yeah. You know, they're just not they're not great, right? I mean, we saw them live. They really struggle when teams turn up the defensive pressure. Not having Hopkins is obviously a huge thing uh, in terms of how easy they can score the ball. It really depends on Pierre and Bensley Joseph to go get them a bucket, right? Their bigs are not good right now. Um, they have guys out there, sometimes that literally give them zero offense. So that's a big problem, right? On a Division I college basketball team in a major conference, like if you have guys out there that can't give you anything, that's just a big issue. I'm definitely, I'm definitely with you. They haven't been good either. Most of the Big East hasn't been very good, to be quite honest with you. Um, but as for one team that has overachieved, I'm in agreement with you here. Marquette's been awesome. They have some really quality wins on the road. They just get it done. Shaka Smart just knows how to win. Gets his guys playing hard. Um, Stevie Mitchell, Chase Ross, they've been really good to complement Cam Jones, who's been one of the best players in the country so far. Joplin's had kind of an up and down season, but this Marquette team, not really sure what their ceiling is, but as long as Shaka Smart's at the helm and Cam Jones is running the offense, they're gonna have a fairly high floor.
For sure. Yeah, they're definitely the overachiever in this conference. Like coming into the year, I had them as the fifth best team in this conference. Like obviously injuries to Creighton and Xavier kind of made that look a bit worse. But they've won pretty much all the big games that they've played in. A road win at Maryland, beat Purdue at home, beat Georgia, who's been a solid team this year, Wisconsin at home, and they recently just beat Xavier on the road. Yeah, it's just been a super impressive start, and the offense has been especially great. It's been even better than it was last year. And you had like two NBA draft picks in Tyler Kolek and Oso Ighodaro, and Cam Jones has made this offense look even better with his scoring ability at the point guard position, which wasn't necessarily something Kolek brought at a high level. But they have weapons pretty much all over the floor, which has been a bit surprising. Chase Ross has really made like the necessary leap for this team to, take the next step on the offensive side. And obviously the defense is great under Shaka Smart. They force a million turnovers every single game, and they play with a bunch of intensity no matter what situation they play in. So yeah, they've certainly been the overachiever, and until further notice, they're probably the best team in the Big East. I think they barely inch out UConn right now.
Yeah. I mean, I think for me, as I've said over and over, I've harped on, I think UConn in tournament setting I'd still take, but up to this point, it's hard to dispute. Like Marquette's been the top team, for sure. Now, moving on to the Big Ten, this conference, like we said, is just there's a real lack of elite teams at the top, right? We have several ranked teams, but nobody that really like stands out. Michigan State and UCLA are the ranked teams. Oregon also sitting up there at number 9, which is just absurd. But that's besides the point. I think this conference by season's end is just going to be so confusing about who's in, who's out, because they're all just going to beat up on each other at home, because I don't think there's really any clear top dog.
Yeah, no, this conference has a ton of balance right now, and there haven't been a ton of overachievers or underachievers. A lot of teams have kind of been as expected because we all expected them to be like, above average teams, no elite teams in this entire league. Maybe I don't even know. Like obviously Penn State has been pretty impressive so far, and that's my overachiever in this conference. I think the offense has been especially impressive. Like we obviously know Mike Rhodes can, keep the defensive floor pretty high. They force a ton of turnovers, and they have a lot more athletes than they had in past years, or last year anyway. They were pretty small at the guard spot. Now they have a ton of length and athleticism on the perimeter, which has helped their effective field goal percentage defense as opposed like to just being a turnover forcing D. And they have shot makers now, and it's led by like Zach Hicks and Ace Baldwin. And, Zach Hicks has been especially impressive. He's making close to 50% of his threes right now. He's been super impressive. And if he can keep making shots, like they're going to have a chance to be, possibly a top 5 team in the Big Ten. They had a huge win in their Big Ten opener over Purdue. And, they looked dominant in that game. So, I would expect them to at least be 500 in this league. I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of teams finish 500, but relative to where I had them, what, 13 or 14 in the league to start. They're definitely better than that at this point.
Yeah. One team I'm gonna throw out there as an overachiever is Wisconsin. I kind of had them much lower. I think you were maybe a little bit higher on them coming in, but they've been much better than I had anticipated. I think they're sitting at like 10-3 right now. They are 0-2 in Big Ten play so far, which I kind of expected, but I think out of conference, they certainly overachieved. Not sure how good some of those wins that they picked up in out of conference are looking at this point, especially the Arizona one. We thought that was a really quality win. Arizona obviously spiraled basically after that game, losing to Duke the next week, and then continued to pick up a couple more losses. So, Wisconsin, to me, I personally just have them as an overachiever just because of where I slated them to begin the season. I had them, like I said, like 13th or 14th in this conference. Another team to throw in there too for me would be Northwestern, sitting at 9-3. I was really low on this team. I thought it was blasphemy that, aside from Nick Martinelli, big Nick Martinelli fan, but I thought it was blasphemy that this team was sitting where they were in KenPom to start the year. But they beat Illinois at home in a really exciting overtime game. They've had some other quality wins. This team really isn't that bad, and the offense is much better than I anticipated without Boo Buie. So I think both those teams have been overachievers to me.
For sure. And yeah, that big win over Illinois kind of proves that they can compete in this conference. Illinois, for my money, is probably the best team in the conference right now. I think they have the most balance, the most talent, and they were able to beat them in overtime, albeit it was Illinois' first like true road game in the Big Ten. So, but an impressive effort. And yeah, the defense has been far more impressive than I thought. They have a lot of slow-footed guards and bigs on this team. And, Chris Collins is able to maintain a solid defense so far. So, credit to him for doing what he always does.
Yeah, I completely agree. Now, as for underachievers, I know you're all over Rutgers sitting at 7-5. Obviously we talked about the 2 players they brought in, 2 top 5 players in the recruiting class of 2024, both going to be top 5 picks this coming year in the NBA draft. But really feels like an opportunity missed for the Scarlet Knights for what kind of could have been for this team if they'd kind of built it around these guys a little bit better for this one season. You're not going to get a better recruiting class than this probably in the history of Rutgers basketball ever again.
Yeah, and you're definitely not going to get it now after what happened this season. This has been like one of Pikel's like worst seasons in the last like 3 to 4 years. And it's been because of the defense. The defense has always been like a top 15 to 20 unit. It's like outside of the top 100 right now in KenPom. And hey, maybe you can attribute that to the freshmen not being as gifted defensively as we thought, or maybe it's the rest of the roster not being built properly. Like guys like Jordan Durkak and PJ Hayes and Tyson Acuff, like those aren't Rutgers guys on the defensive side. And they don't really have a good rim protector. When they lost Cliff Amore, they didn't really replace him. Obviously, Lathan Somerville is a talented freshman from an offensive standpoint, but the offense hasn't even really been that good. They take pretty inefficient shots, and that starts with Ace Bailey. Like he's a super talented shooter, but he takes a lot of bad ones. He'll shoot you out of a game, just as he did against Kennesaw State in their first true road game. And that's just a game you can't lose, albeit like it is tough to go into those mid-major environments and win games, especially if it's your first one on the road. But they've just been super disappointing. And I wasn't even all that high on them to start the year. And they've underachieved even for my expectations.
Yeah, I'm in total agreement with you there. I think there are a few directions you could go in this conference, but I think that Rutgers is probably the team just based on what they brought in. It's a shame that we're not going to get to see these two top 5 recruits in March, right? They're not even going to play in the NIT. They're going to be prepping for the NBA draft. There's no chance. So it's too bad. Two of the top young players in college basketball are going to be sitting around watching basketball on their couch in March. But the final conference, the ACC, who this is a conference that has not been very good thus far. They got smoked in the SEC ACC challenge. And I know one team you're on as an underachiever is Wake Forest. Before you talk about them, I'm going to talk. I'm not going to harp on this one too much, just because we've talked about them enough. But North Carolina has been, to me, a massive underachiever. They're entering now at what? They're 7-5, They entered this little bit of a break at 7-5, right before conference play. They've really struggled. They almost came back at Kansas, but they have not looked good. I don't want to harp on it too much. There's just a lot of misfit pieces there right now. No true interior presence. RJ Davis hasn't been good enough. Cadeau and Trimble just don't complement him very well. So, Carolina just hasn't been very good, and I don't expect things to really get a ton better unless magically they make a trade for a big, which obviously isn't happening. So, I think Carolina, unfortunately for this season, their fans are going to be in for kind of a tough one.
Yeah, for sure. And we don't need to harp on it too much. They've underachieved on both sides of the ball. It does feel like a roster of sort of misfits, and they didn't go out and get the portal big that they were supposed to go get. And you better believe that they're going to go out and get one next year. They're probably going to have the best one in the country. I don't know who it's going to be at that point in time, but yeah, they're definitely going to need to go get a guy. Washington hasn't been nearly good enough. He's been a huge disappointment. That was one of my breakout players that we talked about in the preseason. He's been pretty bad, to be completely honest. He just looks like a worse player on both sides of the ball than he did when he was playing the backup minutes for Armando Bacot. And yeah, I just don't really see a path for them figuring things out, to joining the elite status, to being a top 15 team again. It just doesn't seem realistic.
Yeah, no, I agree for sure. Now, if you look at this conference, overachieving wise, really no real overachievers for me. I think there's one I'd throw out there, I guess. And that's SMU. They're sitting at 10-2. They have a few quality wins, I guess. They beat LSU. Virginia's not very good. They did beat Washington State, who's been solid. They hung in with Mississippi State. But they also have some, they barely beat Cal Baptist, lost to Butler. So this conference, I just think, has some real issues outside of Duke at the top, and Duke has their own issues too. But I think they're going to continue to improve. But I think as for overachievers, I guess if I had to throw one out there, it would probably be SMU, just by I guess where we probably expected them to be.
Yeah, I mean, that's the one I would have had if I had one. I don't have one here in this conference. They've been flat out pretty terrible. Nobody in this conference has any huge wins outside of Duke. I guess you could say Clemson has had a few good wins, the Kentucky home win. But besides that, off the top of my head, I can't think of any quality wins for this conference that were unexpected. Yeah, it's been pretty ugly. And I would have thrown Miami into the underachiever spot, but I think that would have been a bit harsh, considering Coach L retired earlier today. So he had a great career, obviously, but it was probably time for him to move on. And I'm happy it wasn't him getting fired midseason and him going out on his own terms, like he said. He had some issues with the NIL situations, and he was saying eight players wanted to leave his program after they had made a Final Four run. So a bit odd. And he's obviously gotten players through NIL as well. So I thought that was a bit of a weird statement from him. But yeah, definitely just congratulations to Coach L on a great career. And obviously that George Mason run in 2004 was pretty spectacular. Not that I watched any of it. I was 4 years old back then, so probably wasn't able to watch it. But
yeah,
yeah.
Yeah, no, I mean, definitely great career for him. Too bad to lose, one of the legends of college basketball, but he's 75, right? I mean, I do think like it's too bad that he left in the middle of the season, right? And kind of pointed the finger at the NIL for the reason being, I wish that maybe if he truly felt this way, like I wish he had maybe gotten out before the season, right, in the off season, because I think it just kind of looks a little bit weak. Like I don't mean to be harsh on him because I do think he's a great guy and a great coach, and had a really really good career. But to walk out after losing to two unranked low level teams at home and really struggling this season, despite going to the Final Four just a year and a half ago, it's a little bit of kind of a weird statement by him, like you said, to like talk about the NIL and the portal being the reason why he's leaving, and it's like it's mid-season. So maybe he's just had it with coaching, and I don't blame him, right? I mean the nature of the NIL and the portal is really it's really not good the way that it's managed. So I can't blame him, but I wish that he had gone out kind of in a different way.
Yeah, and maybe it's a little bit of a situation that like what Tony Bennett did, like just prior to the season, like he wanted to give the job to Ron Sanchez. Like I know Bennett wanted to leave, but he wanted to give it to someone that was already on his staff. So maybe Coach L is trying to give like an assistant coach there an opportunity to, coach his way to a job at Miami. Like maybe that's how it is. Like maybe he has a couple assistants on the staff that he was really close with that, could possibly take the job over, which I think it's a decent move. Maybe it's not a good long-term move for a program like Miami, but maybe just more of like a thoughtful move or something like that.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. But props to him, great career. He'll be missed in college basketball for sure. But other than that, games, still no games tomorrow. Back to games on Saturday, like we talked about. With a few good ones, especially Gonzaga, UCLA. So, if you're into college basketball, definitely want to tune into. We'll have some best bets articles coming out. Might have some game previews coming out, and we'll also be doing a best bets podcast episode. So be on the lookout for that. And also we're going to be announcing the giveaway winner on our social at some point tomorrow. So congrats to whoever ends up winning that. But other than that, enjoy the games this weekend. Conference play is right around the corner. And we'll talk to you in our next episode, which will be the next Best Bets episode.